The boulder is conflicted because, on one hand, Season 2 of the live-action remake of Avatar: The Last Airbender was a massive improvement compared to Season 1, but on the other hand, if you continue comparing the show to the cartoon, then it was a bit of a mess. So let me get something out of the way. If you are sensitive to changes made to the source material, then you won't like this show. But you know what I think? I think that Season 2 of this live-action remake was at its worst precisely when they tried to copy the cartoon one-to-one, and they shined specifically when they chose a different path and created something original. So, if you can separate yourself from the cartoon and actually look at what is being shown on screen, then I think you will be pleasantly surprised. Season 2 can become a really enjoyable summer binge. I already watched Season 2 twice and I'd give it a solid 7 out of 10, and I'm not against bumping it up to 8 depending on how Season 3 goes. Obviously, in many places, it's nowhere close to being as good as the cartoon. This live-action remake lost a lot of emotion and nuance that makes the cartoon so great. But I am tired of seeing so much negativity around this show. It's okay to dislike this show, but just because it wasn't what you personally expected, it doesn't mean that it's terrible. There's this simple rule: don't like, don't watch, but stop being a hater for the sake of being a hater. Obviously, there are many things about this show that should be criticized. The audience has to send the creators a message that they need to raise their standards, that the audience won't be satisfied with a bad story. But I'm afraid that people are focusing on absolutely wrong things when it comes to this show. Is it perfect? No, but neither was the original. So I am here to offer a more balanced opinion. I will talk about the problems, I will talk about the messy parts, but I will also talk about everything I loved about Season 2, and I can already warn you that I will be much more positive in this review compared to how I was in my Season 1 review that you can watch on my channel if you haven't already. So as I watched Season 2, even the very first episode, it felt like it was written by different people. And you know what? Apparently it was. I found out that Season 2 had a different showrunner, they also brought in some new writers and directors, and the final product really reflects that. For example, the new showrunner is a woman, so it kind of explains how the female characters in this show went from the worst part in the first season to the best part of Season 2, but more on that later. I want to start by addressing some general problems. First, 7 episodes is not enough, and that's on Netflix, not on the creative team. It doesn't even matter if the final runtime is similar to the cartoon, because with so few episodes, you have to structure them differently. You have to smush many different things together into one, and those pieces don't always fit. On a brighter note, Season 2 was still much better compared to Season 1 in that regard. Most of the time it felt like a continuous story instead of a remix of random events, but it wasn't always perfect, and some plot lines still felt like they were there because they had to be and not because it made sense, but I'll give a few examples later. Another thing is pacing and the lack of build-up for some things. There were moments in Season 2 where I genuinely questioned if I clicked on the wrong episode, if I skipped something. For example, Katara defending Toph from bullies was great, but the problem is that before that, they barely had any scenes together, and there were more examples like this. This season also introduced a few original characters who were kind of a mix of different characters from the cartoon, and they were good, interesting additions, but we saw too little of them. There was no time to get attached to their characters and their stories. I think even having one additional episode could have helped a lot. I know it's kind of confirmed that season 3 will also only have 7 episodes, and it worries me. Rumor has it that the Day of Black Sun will be happening in episode 2, which is insane. So, yeah, pacing and the lack of proper build-up is an issue for this show. The next problem I spoke about a lot after season 1 was repetition and exposition and too much telling and not enough showing. Season 2 is a massive improvement, but it still wasn't perfect. For example, how they explained Jing in episode 1 with Aang and Bumi, and then they explained all of that again in episode 2 with Katara, Sokka, and Suki. But like I said, season 2 was much better, and there were many moments where the actors were allowed to actually do their job, which is, act. Like even the first scene of season 2 where for the first few minutes Team Avatar didn't say a single word, and yet we still saw some funny interactions between them and got a sense for how their dynamic developed. Another problem is that the dialogue and directing were still a bit clunky sometimes. Sokka's cactus juice scene fell really flat. There was also that one kid during the Serpent's Pass.
I'm just a kid.
But I have to say that even the worst parts of season 2 weren't nowhere near as bad as the worst parts of season 1, some of which even made me physically cringe. Overall, the directing, the dialogue, all of that was greatly improved for season 2. Another thing that really bothered me in season 1 was how they used slow motion, and once again I am glad that I can say that they really eased off with the slow motion in season 2. The worst scene was during Mei and the Ty Lee fight, but overall they didn't use this effect much this season, which is great. And that's pretty much it when it comes to general and more technical problems. There were some individual specific elements I didn't like, and I'll talk about some of them throughout this video, but as you can see, the overall quality of season 2 improved by a lot. Now let's move on to some things that I had no problems with in season 2. First, season 2 was beautiful visually. They filmed on location with huge practical sets, and the difference is crazy. The CGI parts also looked great, like the serpent or the library. I loved the composition for some of the shots, the makeup and the costumes too, like the updated Blue Spirit mask. And overall, season 2 felt like a proper high-budget show. Next, after season 1, I complained a lot, and I mean a lot, about the assassination of Katara's character and how all women in general were poorly written. Season 2 fully flipped the script. Katara finally had a real personality, and her personal journey and adventures were some of my favorite parts this season. She became the painted lady. We saw how savvy she is with how she negotiated with so many people throughout the season. She showed her softer side. She showed her more passionate and even playful side. She showed some deep and complex emotions, and overall I adored how Katara was written in season 2. The same goes for the other girls. For example, Suki's appearance was short but good. I especially loved her friendship with Katara and how she even invited Katara to join the Kyoshi warriors.
Join the Kyoshi warriors? Is that even possible? I'm a waterbender.
So is Kyoshi.
It was something I didn't know I needed, but I am glad I got this. Obviously, the main addition to the season was Toph, and she was perfect. I loved that the live action added even more to her character, like more scenes with her mother or the whole side plot about the Beifong family doing business with the Fire Nation. The only nitpicks I have is that the metal bending scene lacked the build-up and impact it should have had, and they also didn't mention her weakness with bending sand. In the cartoon, it was great how Toph, despite being an incredible earthbender, still had some things to learn, but this is an external conflict. Toph's internal conflicts in Season 2 outweighed these small losses. Let's move on to the other girls. Azula was great this season. The show is choosing a different angle for her character than the cartoon, and that's okay. The live-action Azula was somehow simultaneously crueler, but also more human than the cartoon. In the Crystal Catacombs, when she manipulated Zuko, it was genuinely hard to tell how much of that was real, and that's good. It creates intrigue for the audience. It makes us want to find out what's the deal with her character in Season 3. Like I said a bit earlier, Season 2 also introduced a few new characters like Amita, Faye, and General Sung. They were great additions to the season, except for the fact that there wasn't enough time to fully explore their characters. For example, let's take General Sung. I loved how her introduction expanded the world building of Ba Sing Se. Instead of Long Feng being fully in control of everything, we had a Cold War situation within Ba Sing Se, and it had a lot of potential. But unfortunately, the whole Ba Sing Se takeover happened a bit too quickly, it was a bit too messy, and it didn't have the impact it should have had, but I still enjoyed the addition of this character. Another character I mentioned is Amita. It's a bit funny because when I first saw her, I genuinely thought that this might be Hama. But no, Amita was genuinely just a regular Earth Kingdom citizen. And I loved getting the perspective of someone who can't do much physically but still has this unbroken spirit and wants to help somehow, to resist the Fire Nation. It's also cool how similar she is to Teo with their worldview, so it's no wonder that Sai kind of fell for her after seeing all that courage and spirit. And probably my favorite original female character that Season 2 added was Faye. She was a mix between that girl with a scar on her leg, she also replaced the parents in Zuko Alone episode, and she was set up as a potential love interest for Zuko, kind of taking the role of Jin. It's such a shame we only had Faye for one episode. I also wish she had just one more conversation or confrontation with Zuko before he left. I guess the general pattern is that I mostly want to complain about the things that weren't shown on screen instead of the things that were. And the final two girls we need to discuss are Mei and Ty Lee, and this is where I will get a bit more negative, especially when it comes to Mei. Mei's character feels nothing more than Azula's sidekick, while in the cartoon she was a full character on her own. The thing is that Mei isn't emotionless. She's stoic, sure, but she's stoic with an attitude. She always looks annoyed and done with everything and everyone. But in the live action, Mei is kind of just there, and introducing her a whole season earlier didn't help at all. I'm also confused about the whole situation of her and Zuko's romance. Season 2 established that Mei has feelings for Zuko, but we saw no flashbacks, no scenes of them together, nothing. There was this interesting moment in Season 2 where Azula declared she will kill Zuko, and Mei, even after hearing all that, still brought Azula information about where to find Zuko.
Don't you kind of love Zuko? Well, I love you. But I would have killed you.
This scene is the direct opposite of what happened in the cartoon, where Mei told Azula, "I love Zuko more than I fear you." So I'm mostly just curious what the show will do with her character. Can they develop that romance plotline to the point where May's love grows stronger than her fear, or are they just getting rid of that altogether? The same thing is with her and Ty Lee's relationship. It's an important part of the cartoon that they choose each other over Azula, that Azula in the end is completely alone. So I'm mostly just curious how they will handle May and Ty Lee after season 2, where they were shown that they would do anything for Azula at this point. And to conclude this little section, I have to applaud all the actresses for their acting this season, especially Katara, Toph, and Azula's actors. And sure, maybe the acting partially felt better because the directing got better, but the actors also did a great job. Next, let's move on to our boys and uncles. Sokka was great this season. He was genuinely funny, but also emotional when he needed to be. I loved how they explored Sokka's trauma over losing Yue much more compared to what we've seen in the cartoon, and how he also pushed away Suki and then later deeply regretted that. I liked Sokka's friendship with Sai. I liked that the show continued to explore that Sokka has other talents than just being a warrior and that he's the plan guy. The only scene I didn't like, as I mentioned before, was the cactus juice scene, but that's a small thing in the grand scheme of things. Next is Aang, and while season 2 made me care about him much more compared to season 1, but I'd say that his character is still kind of the weakest link in the current Team Avatar. But even Aang had some interesting stuff going on. In the first episode, he was really reluctant to learn healing, and I wish the show explored the reasons why a bit more. Because right now I have a few different theories, but none of them confirmed. This season I also felt a bit more of the burden that Aang is carrying and how scary this whole thing is to him. One very interesting decision when it comes to Aang's character was the ending of season 2. They removed the whole guru and the chakra and attachment to Katara thing, and instead, Aang's conflict was that he could enter the Avatar state, but he just didn't want to. He was scared, especially after what happened at the Northern Water Tribe. So in the Crystal Catacombs, when Aang finally entered the Avatar state, Azula didn't shoot him immediately. In fact, there was a fight, and Aang wiped the floor with everyone like it's nothing. He looked like he was about to kill Azula, but that's obviously not Aang, so he hesitated, he lowered the shards aimed at Azula, and that's when Azula shot him. This moment lost some of the shock of the original, and I can kinda see why some people wouldn't like this change, but personally, I think that this change does something very important to Aang's character. It focuses on a different conflict for him. In the original cartoon finale, Aang's biggest conflict was how to defeat Ozai without killing him, and the live action is simply establishing this conflict earlier. There is a logical chain to how Aang's character progressed in the live action, and the ending in the Crystal Catacombs just had to be different. For example, when he injured and nearly killed the serpent, he panicked quite badly. We saw how reluctant he was to hurt anyone, how he constantly held back his power, especially the Avatar state. Then we had that part where Long Feng told him, "You are too kind and that makes you weak." And when Azula shot Aang because he spared her, Long Feng was proven right, at least for now. And all this sets up a challenge for Aang in season 3. He has to find a way to prove Long Feng that he was wrong, that Aang's kindness makes him strong, not weak. He also has to find a way to make sure that the battle against Ozai ends differently than the one against Azula. This also ties to Zuko, how Ozai thinks that Zuko's compassion makes him weak. And if season 3 keeps the moment where Ozai shoots Zuko and Zuko redirects the lightning, and I think they will keep it, then it will create another parallel how both Aang and Zuko had the power to end their opponents but chose not to. And I know that this parallel was in the cartoon as well, but it happened differently there, and that's okay. And speaking of parallels, I didn't see people discussing how this moment between Aang and Azula is a direct mirror of the moment between Katara and Yon Ra that we should see in season 3. Katara also held her ice shards above Yon Ra the same way how Aang did with Azula, and she also decided to lower them in the end. So my conclusion is that I like that the live action chose to end season 2 differently and explore a different angle instead of trying to adapt that moment one-to-one. I didn't see any direct criticisms yet, but I saw many people using the screenshot of Aang from episode 7 with thumbnails that say how it's terrible and horrible and all kinds of other things, and I disagree. Unlike season 1, Aang has a clear, logical character arc at the moment, even if I can agree that the overall execution of his character was still sometimes lacking. But let's move on to Iroh. The live action is doing a very fascinating thing with his character. In the cartoon, Iroh had already completed his character arc before the show began, but the live action picked an earlier moment in Iroh's journey and decided to explore that instead, and I love this decision. We are seeing in real time how General Iroh, the Dragon of the West, is turning into Uncle Iroh that we all know and love from the original. I also like how they included Iroh rejoining the White Lotus instead of already randomly showing up with them to the final battle. I think it is changes like these that justify the existence of this live action in the first place. This show can explore angles that the original cartoon never could, and I think this is more interesting than trying and most likely failing to replicate the Iroh that we had in the cartoon. Next character is Zuko, and just like season 1, I have almost no notes. Zuko's great. I've seen people losing their shit over the fact that Zuko stole from the pregnant lady, and I can already see at least one angry comment for what I'm about to say, calling me a fake fan or whatever, but I think that people are making this out to be a bigger deal than it actually is. Did Zuko steal from the pregnant woman in the original cartoon? No, but he still did plenty of other questionable stuff. Just because he didn't in that specific scene doesn't mean he wouldn't. Zuko can be an inherently compassionate person and still take the stuff from the pregnant woman in a moment of desperation, and these two things do not contradict each other. While I am not saying that I prefer the live action to the cartoon, but I am saying that I like this change. I think it's good that the live action can explore different angles. Zuko's season 2 arc was all about wavering. Is he good or is he bad? Does he choose the blue dragon or the red dragon? So it makes sense that in one scene he stole from a family and then in the next scene he helped this random kid. I also want to implore people to look at season 2 as a whole instead of just taking one moment out of context and making their judgments based on that alone. They built on that scene. When that one kid called Zuko a good man, he almost visibly flinched. You could see it in his eyes that at that moment he didn't feel like a good man. He also had a pretty visceral reaction to finding the toy in the bag, and the next morning he was overcompensating with his extra good deeds, and this, once again, is a logical chain of events. People act as if the live action assassinated Zuko's character, but no. What was done to Katara in season 1, that was a character assassination. But Zuko in season 2, this is just exploring a character from a different angle. Zuko had a compelling character journey in season 2, and making it slightly different than the cartoon doesn't make it bad. While I'm still on the topic of Zuko, I have to highlight his argument with Iroh at the end of episode 1. This was one of the standout scenes in season 2. So painful, so emotional, but also believable. Keep in mind that there was a significant time skip between season 1 and 2. Zuko spent at least a year living a life he absolutely hated, and that's on top of all the trauma we saw in season 1, so it makes that he eventually snapped. I also like how this argument set up his eventual betrayal at the end of season 2. Zuko blamed Iroh for not fighting for what was his, and in the end, Zuko probably thought that he was fighting for what was his by siding with Azula. I also loved some visual choices, like Iroh offering Zuko a meal and Zuko taking it but not eating a single bite before setting it aside, or how, after the argument, Zuko literally stepped into the darkness. Next thing I want to discuss are the relationships between characters. Unlike season 1, in season 2, Team Avatar finally felt like a real family. The show finally introduced some breathing room, and the characters had many interactions, both silly and serious. Sokka and Katara acted like siblings, Aang and Toph had many lovely scenes, Aang and Sokka had this believable brotherly bond, and the list just goes on. Some of my personal highlights include Sokka and Toph's scene inside the poetry house. They took the whole gag of Sokka's haiku battle from the cartoon and applied it to a genuinely heartfelt scene where Sokka tried to connect with Toph and show her that she can trust them. Season 2 in general had a lot of one-on-one conversations, and not just amongst the Team Avatar, and I think they added a lot of heart to this show. Just look at Sai and Sokka or Iroh and Toph, and don't even get me started on Katara and Zuko. So yeah, exploring relationships between characters is something I really missed in season 1, and season 2 delivered a lot of such one-on-one meaningful conversations. I also keep mentioning Sai, and it's a bit funny how after season 1 I thought that his storyline should have been cut, but he turned out to be a great addition in season 2. Now I am glad that the live action expanded his role and kind of retroactively fixed his character in season 1 by making him more relevant in season 2. While I'm still on the topic of relationships, I have to mention the Team Avatar argument in episode 6. These characters argued from time to time in the cartoon too, but it was never to this degree, and I love the live action for including this. The scene was pretty long too, around 5 minutes, and it was all just arguing. My only wish is that it flowed quicker and was snappier instead of pausing after every sentence, but overall this scene was great. I also love that all the characters separated because of this argument instead of being separated through trickery by external forces like they did it in the cartoon. Most of the time characters causing something is better than them just reacting to something. I also love how this whole argument thematically ties into the whole arc. Ba Sing Se is the city of walls and secrets, and this is exactly what the characters were doing this season. They kept secrets from each other and they built emotional walls around themselves until it all boiled over. Next, I want to discuss some other things tied specifically to Ba Sing Se. I mentioned it before, but the whole Ba Sing Se arc was a bit messy. The individual moments were great, but when you take it all together, some things just didn't quite fit. Like the whole Appa situation. It might be a bold statement, but I think that Appa being taken could have and maybe even should have been cut. The problem is that season 1 didn't lay the foundation and season 2 didn't help with showing how close Appa and Aang are. Appa and Momo were full characters in the cartoon, but in the live action they are just cute fuzzy animals in the background. Appa getting taken in the cartoon changed the course of the whole story, but Appa getting taken in the live action just didn't matter to me as a viewer. We had Aang telling in one of the earlier episodes how if anything happened to Appa, he didn't know what he would do, but telling wasn't enough, and season 2 and season 1 didn't actually show anything that would make me care about Aang's reaction. And this is a perfect example of what I said earlier, how this live action doesn't work when they try to adapt the cartoon one-to-one. Let's look at a similar example with Jin's character. She was there, she went on a date with Zuko, and I just didn't care. I was much more interested in Zuko's interactions with someone like Faye, a character who, unlike Jin, was not in the original. But Ba Sing Se also had plenty of things that were different from the cartoon, and it were those things that I was actually interested in. For example, Long Feng was quite different. He acted much nicer on the outside, and he even pretended to befriend Aang and formed a similar relationship to him as the one that Aang had with Gyatso. In the cartoon, we immediately knew that Long Feng was evil, but the live action sometimes made it seem like he was just doing his job, that it was the king himself who forbid people to speak about the war. To me, Long Feng was like season 1 Zhao. Same villain, different flavor. Another thing I loved was adding the Fire Nation district to Ba Sing Se. Once again, we got to explore something that we didn't see in the cartoon. This is also where we finally met Jung. To be fair, he wasn't named, but his character design and his story matches Jung, so it's definitely him. The most interesting addition was obviously the Painted Lady and Blue Spirit working together as vigilantes, and the best part is how they met specifically when they were defending the Fire Nation district from rioting. It was important for both Katara and Zuko's characters, only in different ways. I know I'm kind of jumping back and forth between random topics, but I want to talk about the Spirit Library sequence for a bit. We got a Toph and Kyoshi conversation, and it was unexpected but quite fun.
I'm the earthbending teacher, by the way.
But you're a child.
Yeah, well, you're dead.
I don't remember if the original cartoon ever showed a non-avatar character talking to one of the previous avatars. And just in general, I love how the library was set up, how it shows you what you need and not necessarily what you seek. Obviously, the library was a big episode for Jet. I think the way how Jet was adapted is an example where you lose something, but you gain something else. The most impactful thing about Jet's ending in the cartoon was the fact that he hated the Fire Nation so much, but in the end, it was his own kingdom that killed him. This was the big tragedy. The live action did something different. Jet died in the spirit library, which doesn't matter by itself, but we must look at the rest of Jet's story. When we reunited with the live action Jet in season 2, it was immediately obvious that he was very different, that something must have happened during the time skip. And obviously it had. The Duke died in his arms. The fate of Pipsqueak is unknown, so Jet stopped being a freedom fighter. He pushed his friends away, and he didn't even try to pretend that he wasn't a criminal. So helping the team, as well as his death and sacrificing himself to save the others in the library, was his big redemptive moment. And I think that Jet's story in the live action in some ways was more memorable than his story in the cartoon, while some things were more impactful in the cartoon. So overall, we end up with two different versions, and that's okay. Next, I have to discuss Katara and Aang's relationship. Season 2, unlike Season 1, began hinting that Aang is falling for Katara. Listen, I like their relationship as friends, but it's no secret that ever since I was a child, I hated the romance between these two for a million different reasons that I don't have the time to get into right now. But the live action is an interesting case. I still don't care about this romance. This plotline feels like it's there because it needs to be and not because it actually works and develops naturally. But surprisingly enough, the live action is actually addressing some of the problems that I had with the cartoon. So if Katara and Aang get together at the end of season 3, I'll be a bit more okay with that. First, Aang's feelings feel like a genuine crush instead of this obsessive, all-consuming attachment to Katara, and that's a much healthier start to a potential romance. Next, his dynamic with Katara feels like just friends instead of a babysitter and the kid she's looking after like it was in the cartoon, so that's also good. Aang is also less pushy. I'd say the live action wrote the opposite arc for him, actually. For example, in the cartoon, when Katara said that she was confused, Aang just kissed her anyway, obviously making Katara even angrier. And listen, this scene wasn't bad. Aang was just a kid learning to navigate his first relationship, but if you plan to make these characters get together, especially in a kids show where you want to showcase healthy relationships, then Aang should have realized his mistake. He should have apologized to Katara, but he never did. And this is where the live action chose a different approach. We had a similar scene where Aang was about to tell Katara how he feels about her. She looked like she didn't want to hear anything in that moment, and Aang backtracked. So it seems like his arc in the live action, instead of being too pushy, is the opposite, and it's about how he doesn't have the courage yet to confess how he feels. And you can do some fun things with that as well. You know how water is about change, earth is about standing your ground, so fire can represent moving forward. It can be about passion. So as Aang learns firebending in season 3, he can also discover the courage he needs to talk about how he feels. Another example I want to discuss and explain why I think the live action is handling this potential romance better is the argument scene in episode 6. We know that Katara will always stand with Aang. We know that she loves him, but Aang blamed Katara for being selfish. He blamed her for not choosing him over the things that she wanted to do. At first, I thought that this conflict would carry over into season 3, but they resolved that pretty quickly. There was this scene where Ira told Aang that he needs to be himself, but he also needs to allow his friends to be themselves too. And even in episode 5, before the whole argument, Aang heard a similar lesson from Yang Chen when she told him, "You can't control other people, you can only control your own actions." This is another reason why I never liked the cartoon romance between Aang and Katara. It felt like Aang didn't see and accept all parts of Katara, only the parts that felt convenient to him. So, with the live action, I am now curious how this setup in season 2 will change their relationship. In season 3, we should get at least one major moment where Katara and Aang's worldviews clash, and I am obviously talking about the Southern Raiders plotline, and I hope the advice that Aang heard in season 2 will change his responses to Katara in season 3. So, in conclusion, I never thought I'd say this, but the live action is actually making the potential Katara and Aang romance better. The age and maturity gap is still weird. That didn't change, but the dynamic changed, and that's a start. Next, I want to briefly discuss the lion turtle situation. We saw hints of that in both seasons, so it's happening. I don't see season 3 of the live action ending in Aang straight up killing Ozai, but I need the live action to change the introduction of the lion turtles. Maybe Aang can hear about the energy bending from the lion turtle, but develop this technique by himself instead of just being given this power. Perhaps they can introduce some additional challenge to Aang, some sacrifice perhaps, because if we look at the cartoon, then Aang's journey leading up to his victory felt like a sequence of very lucky events instead of his character overcoming something within himself. I also need to discuss Roku. In season 2, there was no Avatar Roku, and I worry that it might become a problem later. In season 3, we should find out about his history with Sozin as well as his relation to Zuko, and I'm afraid this plot twist will land very flat when Roku was barely in the show, when in the cartoon he was Aang's main guide. But like I mentioned before, this live action created a situation where we lose some things, but we gain something else. For example, during the flashback scene with Ozai and Ursa, they hinted at bloodlines and prophecies, and if you're familiar with some of the comics, then I think this show might be setting up some additional reveals and plot twists. Speaking of setups, they absolutely set up bloodbending this season, but I want you to pay attention to how they did that. The first hint was when Katara was teaching Aang healing, and when she said, "Feel the flow of blood," the camera really lingered on her. The second time was when she tried to bend venom out of that little girl's arm. Both these scenes are related to healing, so I am willing to bet that season 3 of the live action will reframe bloodbending. In the cartoon, one very disappointing part was how the bloodbending was declared as evil with no nuance, but it's not the discipline itself that's evil, it depends on the people who use it. So I'm willing to bet that the live action will change that Katara will make peace with her darker side by using bloodbending for something positive like healing. And that's why in season 2, the scenes where this skill was set up were both related to healing. On a side note, I was thinking of doing a separate video about my hopes for season 3, things I would like the show to change, maybe even about my worries for season 3. So if there's any interest, let me know and I might do it. If there's no interest, then I might still do it because no one can stop me. Moving on, one of my personal highlights this season, very unsurprisingly, was the Katara and Zuko scene in the prison. Listen, if I didn't already know where this story was heading, then I would have thought that season 2 set up a romance between them. To be fair, I was a Zotaro shipper since 2008, and you'll have to rip this ship out of my cold, dead hands, but I want to talk about the fans, actually, and not the show itself. It's so funny because I saw the most vicious, the most nasty comments about people who ship Zuko and Katara, and I just want to know what is going on in your life that you feel so personally offended that some stranger on the internet enjoys the idea of two fictional characters getting together. First of all, chill out. And secondly, I think that some people should really re-evaluate why they even like Avatar in the first place. It's not having an unpopular opinion or liking a non-canon ship that makes you a fake fan. What makes you a fake fan is being a shitty human being to others. And it's no longer just about the ship wars or whatever. There's been so much bullying directed at the actors, the writers, and other crew members of this show, and it's disgusting. Like, some of the actors are literal kids. So how pathetic do you have to be to harass them just because this live-action remake isn't exactly what you personally expected it to be? I remember when I was a kid and saw Avatar for the first time, I thought that this cartoon should become a mandatory viewing for everyone. I remember thinking that if everyone watched this show, then the world could become just a little bit kinder. And I was never deep in the Avatar fandom, but once this live-action show began airing, it's kind of unavoidable that I keep seeing a lot of stuff on social media, on YouTube, even in the scary old Reddit, and I am shocked by how toxic this fandom is. So yeah, I just wanted to rant for a minute about how disappointed I am after seeing the shit that people say about the young actors of this show or what people say about other fans. Just chill out. But let's go back to something way more positive and discuss the show again. Like I said, I loved the Katara and Zuko conversation in the Crystal Catacombs. It was great, regardless of if you see the romance potential or not. They kept the lines from the cartoon, but they also extended that conversation by a lot. Plus, the fact that these two fought together and Zuko tried to help Katara even after knowing who she really was, just added even more weight to this whole scene. I really liked how they both admitted incredibly dark things about themselves. For Katara, it was the fact that she feels guilty for surviving, and for Zuko, it was the fact that a part of him felt like he deserved to be burned by Ozai. And sure, you could pick up on these things in the cartoon as well. For example, one of the best scenes with insane emotional impact was when Zuko was standing on top of a mountain in the middle of a storm and screaming at the sky, "Come on, strike me, you never held back before." So yes, the live action didn't have a powerful and symbolic scene like that, but I think that the conversation in the live action also worked. It's one of those cases where telling things directly is not a problem because the confessions that Katara and Zuko made are so dark and so hard to admit that actually saying those words is what hits you emotionally. I also continue to be blown away by the performance of Zuko's actor. I liked him in season 1 and he's only gotten better in season 2. I think I'll just insert a clip with one of my favorite line deliveries this season.
No matter how much you hate this face, Katara, I hate it more.
You can truly see someone who's deeply, deeply hurting, and it's crazy how much raw emotion I felt from this performance throughout the season. Going back to that specific conversation between Katara and Zuko, in the cartoon, they got interrupted after Katara offered to heal Zuko, but the live action added a couple additional lines, and I think they worked. Zuko said, "I don't deserve it." Katara replied, "You will," and this literally summarizes Zuko's journey in season 3. Just replace the word healing with forgiveness. Maybe at the moment Zuko really doesn't deserve forgiveness, but once he realizes his mistake, once he takes the first steps to make things right, that's when he will deserve forgiveness. I think this moment works especially well for people who know where the story is going, or it's a moment that will get better upon a rewatch for live-action only viewers. I want to highlight another moment. When Zuko was hallucinating, in the play he saw the blue spirit save the painted lady flowers, and to me it looks like foreshadowing for that moment in season 3 where Zuko will save Katara from lightning. It's just like with Katara and Zuko conversation or bloodbending hints or the visual parallels between Aang and the Katara and Yon Ra moment. I like how this season included many little details that hopefully will pay off in season 3. It just makes it feel like season 2 was constructed with much more care compared to season 1. I had a lot of other smaller notes, but this video isn't meant to be a deep dive. I just wanted to give my general season 2 review, so to end this, I'll just highlight one specific comedic and very meta moment that lives rent-free in my head.
I will capture the Avatar and restore my honor.
I've never said that!
So to conclude this whole review, the live-action remake isn't perfect, but neither was the original cartoon. That show was made for kids 20 years ago. This live-action remake is aimed at different audiences. Season 2 delivered a different version of a familiar story, and I enjoyed it. Sure, there are many surface-level problems, but on a deeper level, the way how the characters are written makes sense, and I am so tired of hearing people say that Season 2 has trash writing just because it wasn't written how they wanted it to be. To me, it's obvious that the team genuinely tried to make a nice product, and even with all the imperfections, this show still has a lot of heart. I also want to offer a bit of positivity. As far as I know, seasons 2 and 3 were being written at the same time and they were filmed back to back, which means that season 3, at the very least, should have the same quality as season 2. After season 1, I didn't care much about this show. Then I went into season 2 with cautious optimism, but after seeing season 2, I feel genuinely excited for season 3 and I want to find out how they wrap this whole thing up. And that's it from me. Let me know what you think, and if you didn't like season 2, that's fine, but I'm curious why. Is it because you keep comparing this show to the cartoon, which I perfectly understand, by the way, or did you interpret the whole season differently than I did? I'm always curious to read comments that disagree with me, as long as it's not hating for the sake of hating. And maybe you were like me and you also liked this season, then in that case I would also love to hear from you. Also, let me know if you would be interested in any additional videos about Avatar. For example, like I said, I could make a video about the things I hope to see in Season 3. But for now, thank you if you are still here, and I hope to see you again next time.